It's happening. It's finally happening. I'm finally talking to Rukshan. This is so exciting. I'm ridiculously excited. You guys are going to have to extend me a little bit of grace. If I'm fangirling here during the episode, I'm sorry, but it is what it is, man. Like, Rukshan is one of my personal heroes. He just came out of nowhere and has just done incredible work. So you're just going to have to extend me some grace, guys. Just let me have my little moment. I used to really want to meet Denzel Washington, but you know what? I don't care anymore because I've met Rukshan, right? How do you top that? We're going to be chatting tonight. We're going to have a really, really good talk. There is so much going on, and there's so much to Rukshan that you're not going to hear from Paul Barry and Media Watch, and you're not going to hear from all the BS artists that are trying to cover their asses and trying to. Like, there's this really weird thing going on in the media right now where they're scrambling to justify their own existence in a world where people like Rukshan are kicking their ass. It's just hilarious. It's brilliant to watch. So, yes, I'm going to fangirl tonight. And no, I am not ashamed. I will own that shit. And we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. Now, before I do get Rukshan on, I very quickly want to share with you, this is the poster. Now, let me get rid of that branding there. This is the poster from the documentary that we have just launched the fundraiser for. You'll find the link to the fundraiser on my Facebook page, on my Instagram, and it is, Give, Send, Go / Battleground Melbourne. This is a documentary that we're fundraising for. We need about $65,000 as a minimum budget for me to be able to pull the team together. For those that are new to me and you don't know who I am, my background is TV. My background is docos, films, etc. I've been in this game for over 12 years. And so I'm directing this particular documentary, and I need your help to be able to pay the team that I need. So what this is all about the fall of the world's most livable city, as seen through the eyes of those who risked everything to save it. This is our side of the story. The government has put its side of the story. The media have put their side of the story. This is our reply. So if you want to support that, please do. You'll find the links on my Facebook page. But enough of the advertising. You didn't come here for me to crap on about what I'm doing. You came here for the slow chat with Rukshan Fernando. And so, without any further ado, it gives me an enormous amount of pleasure to introduce, yes, it's real, the one and the only Rukshan. How are you?
Good, Topher. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing very well. I hope that my introduction has made you feel really awkward and out of place and a little bit weird about the whole thing, because that was my objective. How did I do? Do you feel awkward?
Yeah, I feel pretty cringy, man.
Yeah, good. All right. I've done well then. I've done well. Listen, I hate to start off on a bad note, but when I announced last night that I was going to be talking with you, I got inundated with messages, emails, comments, people all demanding that I ask you one question. There is one question that is on everybody's mind, and I'm sorry to do this to you, mate. I'm sorry to be the one that asks the hard questions and really gets into the stuff that matters, but I have to, in good faith with my own audience, I have to ask you this question. Rukshan Fernando, why do you live stream in portrait instead of landscape? I've said it.
Oh,
That's a brilliant.
The world wants to know. That's a brilliant question. Yeah, even I would be upset watching that. Like, I am upset with that kind of footage because I'd prefer it to be more cinematic and smoother. But the reason that I stream in portrait is because the phone is actually attached to the camera that I'm using to film with, my digital, like the SLR style camera. So where I get my better quality videos from. I have no choice but to attach it to the side of my phone in portrait mode as almost like a backup. So, that's the reason. I don't like it either as a photographer. I think it's not a good way to film something. But I am just to let you guys know that I am working on modifying my setup so I can film in vertical and have it smoother. So I have been listening to the feedback, and I will implement the changes.
I've actually just switched from my phone, which is all I've used up until literally Saturday, or was it Saturday a week ago, to a GoPro, which was funded by one of my sort of supporters. And the difference is so ridiculous. And it streams through the phone, like it just hooks up to the phone. It uses the phone's data to then stream onto the internet. The difference is ridiculous. Yeah. So,
I did see you with the GoPro the other day. And I was thinking,
that's right. You were behind me. Just before all the cops moved in, you were right behind me, I think.
I was like, this guy's rocked up to compete with me with a GoPro now. So.
No, listen, man, no one is competing with you. There is no way in hell I'm going to try and compete with you because I'm guaranteed to lose. I'm not going to set myself up into a losing proposition. No, actually, listen, can I open with an anecdote? And I'm sorry to monopolize the conversation really early on, but can I open with an anecdote? Because your existence and the existence of, of others, Avi Yemeni as well, and a couple of other live streamers that are doing some really good work. I would say, Avi Yemeni is a reporter. He's getting out there, getting the report, the people's opinions, sticking microphones in people's faces. I would say you're a journalist. You are journaling what's happening. Your focus is just getting a documentary evidence of everything that sort of goes on and trying to get that on the camera. I had a bit of a moment about, I think it was about, well, actually, you know what? I know when it was. It was 2015. It was the year, 2016. It was the year that I won that award just there. I was at the Australian Libertarian Conference, and there were a couple of up-and-coming personalities who were trying to get out and trying to sort of make a name for themselves and make a way for themselves. And I was really hoping that they were going to be hugely successful because I never wanted to do what I do. And it's not to say I resent it. Whatever. But this isn't what I chose. It kind of chose me. And I'm not going to bore everybody with that story, but I have literally tried to kill off Topher multiple times over the 12-year journey. I've tried to leave Topher behind. And every single time someone comes out of the woodwork and is like, oh, Topher, we need you to come and do this thing. There's this issue. There's this project. There's this something. And in 2016, I thought there were a couple of young up-and-comers who were coming through that were going to replace me. And I was like, these guys are talented. They look like they've got their heads screwed on right. And this is great. I'm going to be able to finally leave it all behind and no one's going to come and hassle me anymore. And I can just get on with my life and do the things that I want to do. And then I met some of them in person and was deeply disappointed and had a really disillusioning kind of moment and realized, fuck, I'm stuck. I'm stuck doing what I'm doing for a while longer, at least. So for me personally, the rise of people like yourself is one of the most thrilling things because this has been freaking lonely for 12 years. And early on in the pandemic, and we'll talk about when you kind of got active, but early on in the pandemic, it was still freaking lonely. And then all of a sudden, not only am I not alone, but there are people like yourself that are getting 10 times the audience that I can, 20 times the audience that I can. And I'm like, yes, finally, thank you. I'm done. Someone else has come through and done a better job. So for you, it must be incredibly surreal because you never set out to have a big audience. This isn't something that you chased or pursued. You tell us a little bit about who was Rukshan prior to COVID-19.
Yeah, sure. Like you said, I mean, I never set out for any of this stuff. And prior to COVID-19, I was very busy focusing on my business that I'd been working on for upwards of a decade now. That's majority of my focus was, on my business. And I think for a lot of Victorians, until COVID, their focus was on everything else but government, for instance, in Victoria,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
We're so lucky to be living, very lucky to be living in Australia, in Victoria. We hardly had to think about our government because, they don't necessarily, there's issues there, but they don't necessarily define your life to the extent that it's been happening, right? So I was just getting on with life and, trying to take, my business higher and higher in terms of what I want to achieve with that. And obviously, with everything that went down, it really made me kind of, I guess, retool refocus myself and organically, use some of the things that my skill, for instance, in the field, especially in the creative field initially, to make sense of everything that was happening around me. And I've told other people, like some people took up knitting, people did other different things during that time off, right? That initial time off, they were telling us on the TV, this is the things you can do at home. And for me, it was like, okay, I'll make some memes or this kind of thing. Like that's kind of where it kind of came from.
That was your outlet. That was your coping strategy for what was going on.
Yeah, that was my outlet. Obviously, like, even though I'm working in an industry that's not necessarily related to politics, As you know by now, that in the wedding industry, as an individual, you're always to some extent engaged with politics, and I think that's been a passion of mine throughout my life. So this just kind of helped me look into what's going on in Victoria more, and I didn't like what I was seeing, so that kind of helped me, push me to do what I'm doing, because the actual real Rukshan page, I had started that in 2003, so that had laid dormant for 2013. Sorry.
That makes more sense. I was going to say that must have been on MySpace, 2003.
No, yeah, I did have a political MySpace as well, but 2013 is actually when I started that page, and for a long time it just lay dormant. So I never kind of got it off the ground, and then all this kind of transpired.
Okay, already I want to take this conversation in two different directions, but I'm going to stick with Rukshan before COVID. I want to talk about the political side of Rukshan before COVID in a moment, because I didn't know that. So that's interesting. But let me take for a moment. You've been almost. It was published as an insult. It was clearly intended to be an insult, but you've been called the wedding photographer or the wedding videographer. So I did my time in wedding videography. It turns out I was rubbish at it. Wedding videography sucks. Like it is, and photography as well. It is such hard work, and you have to get it right every single freaking time. So was that the core of your business before you went into, before COVID kind of shut that down and you pivoted from there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been doing this for 11 years now in that industry, and after 6-7 years into it, kind of doing a more like a managerial role and overseeing type of role as well. So it's not so much always working in the field of overseeing business. So it's like any small business. There's lots of things that go into it, right? But yeah, like obviously doing wedding videography and wedding photography, you would think that it's a very kind of niche thing, and it's very focused on, you just think of typical things about a wedding. But the thing is, in a wedding, there's so much to learn, right? There's so much, different characters, different drama. It's very political. Sometimes there's lots of different layers to a wedding and dealing with people. And in many ways, a wedding is political.
So have you ever worked a wedding where at the end of the wedding, the bride and groom were not married?
I have done weddings where, for instance, the groom hasn't shown up or the bride hasn't shown up. So done weddings like this. But yeah, like obviously once you do hundreds of weddings, you go through a gamut of different experiences. But the majority of weddings are pretty straightforward in the sense that, it happens and the marriage it's done in the main. So
I had one. Sorry.
No, go for it. Go.
I was just going to say I had one very memorable occasion where I had gone to the bride and photographed. I'd gone to the groom and videoed. Gone to the groom and videoed. Got all the rings, got all the flowers and the bouquets and all the stuff you got to get as the wedding videographer. Showed up to the actual wedding ceremony, and something had happened in between when I left the groom's place and the ceremony, where the bride had found out, as best as I could tell, because I never got the full story, that the groom had been cheating on her. And so she shows up to the ceremony and she just comes barreling down the aisle, forget like the music and the bridesmaids and the dad on her arm and everything. She just comes barreling down with a head full of steam and just, what the fuck did you do? What the fuck did you do? Coming down the aisle of the church in her wedding gown at the groom. And they did not end up married. Let's just put it that way. And I never got paid for the job, unfortunately. So it can get really interesting sometimes. But I've got to say, it does explain your stamina, because wedding videos and wedding photography is genuinely difficult and genuinely long hours. And the stuff that you did with, particularly when the tradie protest started, and it was day after day after day, your physical stamina is phenomenal. Do you? I have to ask. Do you play like sports and stuff outside of work?
No, I actually, like you said, I attribute to this stamina to my experience doing weddings. So on a typical week for us, for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we would usually start around 5 a.m. and finish around 1 a.m. and then do it again the next day and the next day. So you are doing continuous days of on your feet, walking around with cameras.
20 hours.
So you get you get used to it, and that's kind of where I've built my stamina in terms of being behind the camera. And I saw some comments afterwards after I did those streams, people saying he hasn't taken a bathroom break or any of this kind of stuff. And some wedding you don't get the opportunity, so you learn to keep going, and you learn not to eat food, and you're kind of just engrossed in that what's happening, because your focus as someone who's documenting an event is purely just about documenting, and you kind of lose yourself in that moment. So when I approach these kind of live streams or covering a protest, whatever it is, I'm kind of engrossed in that, visually in that moment, and seeing what I can capture. And it has to be, for me, it has to be continuous. Like I'm just, I can't stop. So I just keep going.
Well, more recently, I've stopped bothering with my own live streams for the most part. And when they're at the Shrine on the Wednesday with all the tradie protests on the Wednesday, my focus when I showed up was literally to hold your camera for you and to try and give you a bit of a break, because this was your third freaking massive day. And you knew that I was coming in for that purpose, and I found you, and you were like, oh, no, I'm good, and you were good. I ended up holding the camera for maybe a grand total of 4 or 5 minutes over the entire hours that I was there. And this was on the back of you having walked across the Westgate Bridge, and your rig is not light. You've got a handle that then has a gimbal on it, which stabilizes the camera, that then has your DSLR or mirrorless or whatever it is, I don't know what it is, camera on that. And then on the side, you've got your phone. And then you've got batteries in your pockets and all kinds of stuff going on. Like, this rig is not lightweight. So massive respect to you, mate. Like, you deserve every single bit of respect that you've been getting. Why did you go to the first protest that you went to? Like you said, before all the lockdowns, you had focused on the videos, etc., on the weddings, etc. Lockdown happened, you started making memes and doing a bit of that stuff. But at some point, you went, I have to pick up a camera and I have to actually get there. What was that thought process for you?
Yeah, I mean, I can go back a bit and cover some of the ways that I've kind of changed in terms of my views of this entire lockdown thing. But maybe we can go to that later. But initially, like, in terms of going to, I mean, look, when this all started for me as a business owner, and I've shared this story multiple times now with people that think that it's hypocritical to kind of change your views, for instance, right? But you have to understand that when all this happened, my experience with this is as a business owner. So for me, when all this happened, we got behind my business, myself. We got behind the government in terms of what they were doing. So, and I think a lot of the community at that point, this is in March 2020, very early on, got behind what was happening. And what people don't understand is, like, for someone like me, who's very much engrossed in news and social media and all this kind of stuff, I had been looking at these events unfolding in China and stuff since, some in towards late Jan. And there was already commentary happening online within other countries about what was going on. So I was concerned, definitely, like, it's something new. We hadn't seen this before. And for me, the concern was mostly around not the health aspect of it, but just from being someone that's engrossed in history, I've seen how governments react to these situations. So I've always been weary of how governments will actually, react to these situations in terms of, whether it might be food shortages or all this kind of stuff, right? So, up in February, I was already ordering masks. I was purchasing, this is before all the hysteria, long before that, purchasing extra stuff and all this kind of stuff, right? Do stuff that people ended up doing a month or so after. And so I was genuinely invested in supporting the government. It seemed like something different, new, like we hadn't experienced this before. And, for a few months there, as much as I was, upset about it as a business owner, because obviously it's impacting the wedding industry in a massive way.
Hugely.
I was, I was fully prepared to sacrifice in my business, no matter what happened, and do what I need to do in terms of supporting the government.
Mm-hmm.
But along the way, you kind of see these cracks emerging. You start seeing, once you start paying attention, you start seeing that actually a lot of this is actually very politicized now. It's very political.
Yeah.
And these people, these politicians, these bureaucrats are actually now playing with our lives and our livelihoods. Of course, they've got a reason to be doing that, but the way they're going about it is, maybe not transparent. It's causing different issues. I'm seeing other states doing different things, other countries doing different things.
Yeah.
And then you start questioning, why is it that this is happening to us in our state, for instance? That was my first kind of moment where I realized like something's not quite right. Personally, like that's what I felt, right? And then, you can probably relate to this, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, because I think a lot of people initially were very open-minded in terms of doing their bit for the country and the state.
Yeah. Look, it's fair to say if this had turned out to be something like a Spanish flu or worse, then some of the reaction would be much more justified. I would argue that in around about March, about the middle of March, I released my first video. I believe it was the third week of March, 2020. And by then, we already had data coming out from the likes of Professor John Ioannidis and other luminaries of the world of epidemiology. I mean, genuinely, like Professor John Ioannidis, he literally wrote the book on epidemiology and statistics around epidemiology. All these other epidemiologists in the world, they became qualified epidemiologists because they read his book and they learned from him, right? He's the guy. And he came out in about the third week of March, sorry. And the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine also separately came out with their own thing, all of which pointing to this is bad. It's about 3 times worse, 3 times deadlier than a normal flu, but that's about it, which is not even as deadly as a Spanish flu. And that was really where, for me, I agree with you. When they first said 2 weeks to slow the spread, 2 weeks to protect the healthcare system, I went along with that, right? As the vast majority of people did. People in Australia are generally very good-willed, and we generally want what's best for our neighbor, and we're willing to pay a certain price in order to achieve that. You may recall back then they were saying don't wear masks. They were saying it's a waste of a mask. Don't wear a mask. Just socially distance, limits on capacities for restaurants and cafes and so forth. And then sort of one thing went to another. So that's how it began. How did you arrive at the point where you picked up a camera and you went to a protest? And which protest was that, by the way?
I think it was the protest. It was actually the first protest I went to was the protest at the shrine, I think.
Okay. Yep.
There was a protest at the shrine in October 23rd, maybe. I'm just trying to remember exactly.
Funnily enough, the video that I have teed up to play during our toilet break, coming up at about 9:30, is actually my speech from that protest. So that's the protest you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it was that one. That date I remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's that. And the story behind that is I had been watching, these kind of protest coverage on the television, because there've been other protests before that. And famously, we had the BLM protest as well in June or July.
Correct.
And, I've been kind of I'd been following that and doing kind of news snippets and doc commentary based on those things. And it got to a point for me where I kind of sensed something wrong in the way that the media is portraying the events that are happening at these protests, and not from any particular not from anyone telling me or anything like this. I just kind of got that sense, right, from what I was seeing on phone footage, for instance, that was on media that was being circulated. It just didn't kind of match. It didn't match the reporting of the mainstream media, and for someone like me, who's very curious about how the media works and operates, it got me interested in the sense that they're doing something here. They're being cheeky with their coverage, and if they can make me, who's wasn't really paying attention at that time, to think that these people that are out there listing are the great unwashed of society, they're just the lepers of the society that are causing trouble for it. If they can almost get me to think that, who's someone who's very attuned to all this stuff, right? Because I wasn't fully focused on what was going on with the protests and stuff. If they can do that to me, they must be being very effective doing that to the general public who are maybe not as attuned to what's going on, right? Because these videos didn't make sense that you were seeing from people. So that's what kind of pushed me to challenge myself and go out and actually see a protest and see what these people are all about. And actually going to my and I, to be honest, anyone that's like, for everyone that's watching, I had never ever in my life before that really gone to a protest. So, I've kind of lived this existence where I've seen these things on TV, but I've never actually gone and understood what this is about, right? I'd always just commented on it from afar. So I actually went and with a camera, and I thought, I'll go there, I'll film, and I'll do this thing, right? And then what I what I noticed quickly was that actually these people, they're just like me. They're just Melburnians. They're just Victorians. They're no different to me. They're normal people. They're not what's being portrayed on the television as such. And it just humanizes things when you're actually there. You're hearing these people. You're hearing the actual, the sincerity of what they're saying in their voices. It's not cut together in a package for the news that night. So that kind of changed a lot of my understanding of what was going on. And then the biggest takeaway for me is that later that night, the news reported that there was a few hundred people there, and I had with my own eye. I had with my own eyes, right? And this is someone that was not, let's say, supportive of this, what was going on or whatever. I had with my own eyes seen, a few thousand people. So to actually see how they were manipulating the narrative, to see how dishonest they were being, it really got me like, this has to be like, these people are either just having everyone on, or they can't be this stupid. Like, these reporters can't be this stupid, because I'm standing right next to them, and they're reporting something that didn't even happen.
So Camp Creek Hill,
that's how I ended up.
Fantastic. So Camp Creek Hill has made a great comment here. Would have been good to have live reporting from the first protest in Trafalgar. The police acted in a completely different manner and actually gave us an hour. I was live streaming. I live streamed that entire protest. So that was April 25th, 2020. I gave a speech that is on my Facebook page. You can go back to that date, and I've actually posted it once or twice since. You go into my videos tab and scroll down. You'll be scrolling for a while, but you will find it. And yes, you're absolutely right. The police were waiting for us when we arrived. They didn't start moving in and arresting people. Someone went and chatted with them, and the police basically said, "We're leaving. We'll be back in an hour. If you're gone, then there's no problem." And we made sure we were gone by the time the police came back. And if that had been the attitude of the police throughout, so much of what has happened since, and really, really disgraceful stuff that no one wanted to see, a lot of that would not have happened if the police had taken a similar approach ever since. So, Rukshan, I want to rewind. That's how you got involved in the very first protest. But I want to clear up a couple of things. I actually assumed that you were foreign born for quite some time, simply because your English is so good and your pronunciation and your diction is so good. I don't associate that with Aussies. I associate that with people who were taught English overseas somewhere. But it turns out that assumption was not correct. So can you give me a bit of an idea? What's your background? Where were you born? Was it Melbourne or?
No. So I came here when I was like three years old, or 2 years old.
Okay,
so like very young. So foreign born, but like here young enough to, like I started hearing like, prep or grade 1. So, and that's in southeast suburbs here, if anyone's from Victoria, in Dandenong, which is a very multicultural, diverse, part of the world. I think it's the most multicultural area in maybe the whole world, possibly, in terms of the demographics of people that are there.
I lived there for 4 years, and many of my followers who are listening will know the stories that I tell about Dandenong. I lived right in between the train station and the Centrelink office, and the foot traffic between those two would go past my front door. It was a very interesting place.
Yeah, so I mean, that's like where I grew up. So my experience of Australia was pretty much very young boy going to primary school, and very early on, you're just kind of in this melting pot of what we call multiculturalism. And that's kind of where I grew up for most of my life in Dandenong. I went to primary school there. I went to high school in Dandenong High School. And this is in the 90s and early 2000s. And and Dandenong it's not a, people classify it as like a rough part of town, the city. For me, it just felt like home, but obviously there is certain connotations associated with growing up in that part.
Let me put some context around that. I grew up in Preston, and every 3 months the crime statistics would be released. And we would always get the newspaper when the crime statistics were released because we wanted to see whether we had beaten Dandenong or not. It was down to basically there was a particular shopping centre, Northland Shopping Centre, was the #2 crime hotspot in the whole of Melbourne after Dandenong. And every now and again, we would beat you guys and we would have more crimes than you guys. And it was like, yes, we were more violent than Dandenong. But Dandenong were the undisputed champions. 9 times out of 10, Dandenong won.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like where I grew up. And I'm not saying I grew up in like, this kind of like a movie scene where it's like a tough setting and every day is a hard life. No, but it was a very interesting place to grow up, where it was like normal that was kind of your surroundings, and you kind of you become used to that and familiar with that, and you grow up with that background. So I'm very great now that when I look back on my life, I think I'm very grateful that I went to schooling in that part of Melbourne, and I grew up there, and the experiences that I had growing up in Dandenong has prepared me for the rest of my life. So I'm very grateful. That's kind of where I spend a lot of my time. Yeah.
You can only go up from there. And I say that as someone who did live there for 4 years. So I'm allowed to talk. I'm allowed to rag on Dandenong. I was there 4 years. It was the first 4 years after marriage. I left Dandenong. Let me just tell you this little snippet of my life in Dandenong. We just decided to move out of Dandenong after I saw yet another violent crime happen directly outside the apartment building. So we were on the first floor. I would hear the screams. I was a stay-at-home dad. I had a young son. My wife was working and funding the family, and I was looking after him when he was in his first couple of months of his life. And we would hear people screaming on the street, and I would go out onto the balcony, and usually I'd be the first one to react. And I'm screaming at some dude down on the street who's smashing someone else's head in with a half of a brick or something, equally obscene. It's just the stuff you see is crazy. And I went downstairs when the police, and then the police arrived, and I've got this guy, his head's in my lap. He's bleeding everywhere. He's passing in and out of consciousness. And the cop pulls up and he steps out of the car and he says to me, "Oh, hi, Chris." And I was like, wait a minute. You know me by my first name on sight, not because I'm a criminal, but because I've been a witness to so many crimes that you've pulled up to, and I've been the guy, right, who's giving you the police report. And then I went into my phone after it was all done and I was back upstairs. I went into my phone and I realized that I had called 000 3 times since the previous time that I'd called my wife on my phone. And that was when I realized I've got to get out of Dandenong. Now, we were right in the worst of it. We were in the absolute middle. Train station was just there. Centrelink office was just there. A drug rehab house was just there. And a squat house selling drugs was just there. Like we were, and I had a view over all of it. So it was the worst possible place to be. But that was my experience of Dandenong, and that's why we got out.
Yeah, but like having heard all that, I don't want to disparage the place. I think it's an amazing town, and I'm glad I grew up there. And I'm
great food, amazing food.
Yeah, great. And my parents are still in Dandenong, and I love Dandenong, and I think I'll always love Dandenong. It has a special place in my heart. You can see me talking about it a lot now because I feel like it defined who I was at a young age, I think, and I'm grateful. It was very good.
And that's fair enough. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you were sort of politically aware. Is there a conscious reason for that, or is that just always how you've been?
Look, I think that's just how I've always been from a very young age. For me, my interest growing up was, either sports or, documentaries about, history or World War II or World War, whatever it was. Like, that's kind of how I grew up, being aware of those kind of historical elements. And obviously at a young, it's hard to grasp the politics that are happening around you. But, I was, paying attention to things that were going on. I grew up with John Howard majority of my life that I can remember, being aware of Australian politics was John Howard. John Howard was the Prime Minister for a long time. And those were the early days of, I remember issues like around, that was kind of when Pauline Hanson came onto the scene.
Yes,
and I remember, there was talk about her in Dandenong, of course, because it's a very multicultural place, and the portrayal of some of the things that she was saying. So, I mean, I remember those pieces of Australian politics that I was kind of aware of in my younger years. But yeah, overall, it's more so the grasping of that kind of historical stuff or just world history that kind of informed my views as a young man.
So you mentioned earlier that most people, and this is something I say myself, so I'm in 100% agreement, most people ignore politics. And let me, my followers have heard me say this before, so I'm going to gloss over this fairly quickly. The concept of rational ignorance, people ignoring something because it makes sense to ignore it, right? And politics is one of those things that for most people, it makes perfect sense to ignore it. You have one vote, you can't really influence it, you can't really change it, no matter how much energy you invest into it. So the rational mind says, if I can't change it, why would I put energy into it? I'll put my energy into other things instead. So rational ignorance, you kind of look at it and go, why bother? And it makes sense. And that's where most Australians are at. And yet, one of the really interesting things about this whole COVID episode is all of a sudden people are realizing that just because you ignore politics doesn't mean that politics will ignore you. But in your case, what you're saying is there wasn't really a trigger. There wasn't really a thing that happened. It's just something that's always kind of been a part of your psyche.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of the times, one of the other reasons that people ignore politics is because, they're living their life. And whether that's carrying on a business or going work day to day, you just don't have time to engage with what these people, up in Parliament House or whatever are doing, right?
Yeah, are doing.
But for me, like, obviously that interest has always been there. And one of the things, Topher, is that, when you think about politics, and it's one of these things, it's like sport almost. And to get yourself interested in it, there has to be something going on, some sort of debate or issue that kind of gets you worked up, right? Like a for and against type thing. And in Australian politics, for me at least, it was kind of dry and, for lack of a better word, boring. Because if I look at politics, back home in my parents' motherland in Sri Lanka, or in the United States, whatever, like that's like crazy politics for me, because people are like, like all journalists are getting arrested. There's like civil conflict. There's major issues that are defining how people are interacting with their government. Here, for a long time, it's just like very kind of mellow, and the biggest scandal is like maybe Pauline Hanson saying something. Like that's kind of thing that was happening. And I'm not saying those things don't matter. Those things definitely do matter. But in the grand scheme, international politics, it was Australia was pretty down, in for me at least at that time.
There's an expression I'm sure you would have heard before, that politics is show business for ugly people. And that's true in most of the world, but it wasn't really true in Australia. It wasn't really that showy, kind of high conflict, almost like it's Days of Our Lives, but in Canberra, it kind of wasn't like that. And then it slowly has become more and more like that in the last, I'd say, sort of 20 years. We've seen it heading in that direction. Was there a particular issue, do you think, that got you interested in politics? Was there something that really kind of sucked you in? Or was it just a genuine, this was just a topic that interested you kind of across the board?
Look, I remember one of the issues that really kind of drew my focus in was, around US politics, but it also applied to Australia as well. And that was when 9/11 happened. I think it was 2000.
Of course.
And
2001.
2001, right? 2001, and I think I was in year 10 or year 11, something like this, right? So that really drew me in. And because, you're sitting there, you're watching this kind of historical event unfold in the West, and you hadn't seen something on that scale before. And then following that, you had this kind of, I had TV, and CNN was my go-to choice back then. And I would sit there in front of the television and just kind of watch that whole thing just unfold. I'm not saying specifically, obviously the dramatic incident with, the incident on 9/11. I'm saying the stuff that followed that. Yeah, the way that governments got together and made a case for war, then went to war. Obviously, things that followed that as well, and I think that kind of focused me in a little bit on how these dynamics, especially in international politics, works, because you had this kind of coalitions and stuff being formed, and it was about ideals and values. That was the way it was sold to people. Like, this is why we're going to war, or this is why we're doing these things. It's an attack on all of us. And as a young man, still in high school, I felt like that kind of captured my attention at that point about what it means to be in the West, and what it means to be a part of this kind of global community of these Western nations that I'm a part of.
Well, I have to resonate with that, because I'm slightly older than you, and I actually went and signed up and joined the Army Reserve not long after 9/11. I was already planning on doing it, but that was a catalyst to make me get off my butt and actually get it done. I signed up to be an infantry soldier only as a reservist. I knew I didn't want a career in the Army, and I spent nearly 3 years in the Army before I realized, and that's what actually started me on the path to becoming a libertarian. I was a conservative back then, but I resonate with that feeling. You're a young man, you're watching this attack, and you're listening to all of the talking heads telling you that this was an attack on you, and this was an attack on your freedom, and this was an attack on everything that you're supposed to hold dear. And it's, as a young man, you tend to kind of accept that and go, okay, that if that's what it is, then how should I react? And now, of course, I view things very differently to how I did back then.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Because when I look back now, like, I look at that part of my life as a lesson in how the media can actually manipulate people. I totally believe that I was actually, as an impressionable young man, I was manipulated by the likes of CNN into actually becoming very, very pro-war. To the sense that you lose all touch of any kind of feelings towards what's about to happen to the nations that are being in response. And I was all for it. I'm saying, like, when I look back now in hindsight, I see how manipulated I was by the media, especially when I look at the way that they went about the Iraq war, and how they manipulated everyone into certain perceptions of what was happening in Iraq. When I'm back on that time, I feel like the media played a massive role in actually creating that narrative and manipulating people based on their patriotism, their love of country and loyalty and all this kind of stuff. So I look at that part of my life as, it did give me that political focus, but it did actually also inform me that potentially the dangers of the media and how much power they have in terms of setting a narrative.
And the division, the concept of othering, turning a human being into something less than a human being. It's one of the most dangerous things. And I've only really woken up to this in the last 7 or 8 years. And I certainly wasn't awake to it back then. I was very much on board. A mate of mine said to me at one point, like, we were talking about going to war in Afghanistan and going to war in Iraq. Well, Iraq first, or was it Afghanistan first? Then we went into Iraq. I can't even remember anymore.
Afghanistan first. Yeah, Afghanistan first.
Yeah, and then Iraq, and then Iraq kind of finished and turned into a basket case, and now Afghanistan has turned into a basket case. But I was sitting there, and I was on board. I was a good little Johnny Howard fanboy. That was me as a younger man growing up, right? And he there was God, then there was Jesus, and then there was John Howard. Like, that was kind of how it worked in my head, right? And if John Howard said something, well, he was above the Pope. Forget the Pope, Johnny Howard. And so he said we had to go into Iraq. He said we had to support the coalition in Afghanistan. Absolutely, I'm on board. I remember being in recruit course. I was it was in a narrow window of time when the reserves did the same recruit course as the regs. It was only happened for about 2 years. And that was when North Korea detonated a nuclear bomb. And for the first time, we knew for a fact that they had nuclear weapons. And I remember I was sitting there, we were eating, it was on the news. It was the only outside media we got to watch. It was a half hour of news during dinner, and sitting there looking around at the other recruits around me. And we were all excited at the idea that we were going to get sent into North Korea to kick Kim Jong-il, as it was at the time, kick his ass, for having nuclear weapons. All right. And I was a part of that. I was a part of that mental kind of journey. But I did have one moment where I went, hang on, am I the bad guy here? And that was actually because of an American friend of mine who came over 30 years ago to live in Australia. And he's very American, though. He's one of those expats who becomes more American, or, when someone leaves the country, they become more like their original country after they've left. They're like, no, all these traditions. He was super American. And he was there. He was like, we should just drop nuclear bombs on the whole of Afghanistan, just kill absolutely everybody and start again. And it took something and he meant it, by the way. Like, that was literally where his heart was at. And it took something that extreme. And I heard that and I went, whoa. I'd been talking with him for a while up to that point in time, and we'd been agreeing. And then all of a sudden he said that. And I was like, hang on, there's millions of people there. And this guy is literally willing, like, the othering, the unpersoning, the dehumanizing of the Afghan people had been so strong in his mind and had taken such a hold that he literally, and he meant it, nuke them all, kill them all, and let's just repopulate that part of the world with some other group of people. That was the very beginning. I would say that was one of the very first things that ever happened to me that began to break me away from the good, staunch conservative kind of mindset, and began that journey that led towards being a libertarian for me. How would you describe yourself? Have you picked a label? Not that you have to, of course, but if you had to sum up your politics, if you want to sum up your politics, you're welcome not to. Is there a way that you do that?
Yeah, look, I think I'm somewhere between, a conservative and a libertarian of some sort.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of define myself exactly. I feel like it's kind of shifting my views here and there, but there's certain values that I subscribe to that would kind of tend to lean me more towards being conservative. But especially recently, I would say that some of the views that I've had and stuff are more on the libertarian the spectrum. But yeah, it's really hard to define myself, and I try not to kind of define myself in a certain way as well. These labels I just use to kind of obviously give some context into what I'm thinking, but I think it shifts and changes, and I think that's okay over time as you become wiser or you learn new things or whatever. I think it's okay to kind of change your
100%. 100% it's okay to change. I'm mystified by these people who think that we have to judge people because they used to believe in this thing. I'm like, really? Right? Like you're just going to take somebody who's like a teenager, 18 years old, and we have to lock them in place and they're not allowed to change their mind or admit that they were wrong. Anyone who's willing to admit that they were wrong, I'm willing to forgive for being wrong, right? Like, I've changed so much over the years, and I think most of us should. If you're not changing, then it means you're not paying attention, you're not learning, you're not thinking, you're not engaging with the world around you. So can I fast forward? Sorry.
No, go for it.
Yeah. So can I fast forward back again? So you came to that protest at the shrine and you saw for yourself. And this is, I get a lot of criticism, as I'm sure you get a mountain of criticism as well. People that want to hate on you and whatever else. And my default response to people now is, come and stand next to me at one of the protests and then criticize. Right? Once you've stood next to me and you want to tell me you want to have a go, be my guest. But until you've done that, I don't care. I don't care what your opinion is. But you came, you saw that for yourself, and you decided to continue on. Now, at that point, I think you alluded earlier, you'd already had your Real Rukshan page for quite some time, but it was kind of sitting dormant. How many followers did you have at that point? Do you remember?
Look, I think I had kind of managed, through my memes and stuff, a few thousand followers, maybe like 6,000, 7,000, maybe 10,000. So, I mean, it was, even with that, like me making the memes and stuff, like that was just for me to have a laugh. Like I laugh myself when I'm doing it. Even now, before this I came on this chat with you, I put up a video of Daniel and like he was not wearing a mask today. I was in a car park and I made a little video with some music and stuff. When I'm doing it, I'm laughing. So I'm actually getting like, it's like stress release. I'm enjoying myself and I'm making these kind of little videos, right? So I was doing it for that purpose, and I didn't really think that people would actually, engage with it and follow. But obviously there was a people were looking for that kind of thing as well, right? So that's how I had kind of got some followers, and it wasn't something that I was trying to, do in terms of gaining followers or something like this. I wasn't really thinking in that way.
Yeah. You were literally just blowing off steam, and I can relate to that. So then you decided after that first protest that you came to, you decided to keep going. Was there a conscious decision, or did it just seem automatic to you that you needed to keep going?
It was automatic. I'm someone that's kind of pretty principled, and when I saw some of the things that were happening and the coverage of the media afterwards, I was quite disappointed in the way that things have been covered. Not because I thought I could do a better job and my version would be correct or whatever it was. It was more so like it needs to be. You can't have this one-sided slant and demonize people in this city, in this state. And I thought, I have the skill set to kind of capture this and to show these things, and that's kind of what motivated me to continue on. Definitely.
Did you have a hope at that point in time, like a goal, a thing that you were hoping to accomplish, or were you just doing it because you knew it needed to be done?
I was just doing it because I thought it needed to be done. I didn't know how people would respond to it or where it would go. I was just like, I'm going to show this from the viewpoint that I'm seeing it from my perspective, and I don't know how that would inform everything else, but I'm just going to do it anyway because I think it needs to be done for the historical record more than anything.
Yeah. What does it say about the state of our media that a wedding photographer, videographer who picks up a camera and just shows the world the truth of what's happening without, and I've got to compliment you here, your narrative and your commentary when you're there, you are remarkably even-handed in my opinion. You will compliment the cops when you believe the cops deserve it. You call out the protesters when there are people doing things that you, in your opinion, shouldn't be done. I think you do a beautiful job of actually giving a relatively neutral commentary, in my opinion. So for what that's worth. But what does it tell you about the state of the media that you picking up a camera and doing what you've done, all of a sudden you're getting sometimes, I've seen as high as 140 something thousand. I've heard that you've had even more at times, but regularly 20,000 to 70, 80,000 people watching your live streams, and Channel 7 has maybe 2,000. Channel 9 has maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people watching. What does that tell you about the state of our media?
Yeah, for me, looking at the media, the way I see it is people like myself, other independent media, we shouldn't exist. We're up against it in terms of the resources that the mainstream corporation, right? We should exist. They have the ability to kind of ensure that we don't exist. But the fact that they are not competing in the same space, the fact that they are not even making an attempt to do the type of coverage that is possible, the type of coverage that people will potentially watch, it tells you something really interesting about the media. And that's not that they don't want these eyeballs. It's the fact that they would rather not have viewed eyeballs than, impact their narrative that they can build with showing a 2-minute or 20-second clip. There's something they've given that up on intention because they know by live streaming something like this from on the ground and talking to people on the ground is actually very dangerous for their narrative that they build later that night on the 6 p.m. news. So
there's something
it's not like they can't.
Yeah, no, they could, but it's really striking when you're, for example, on the Monday at the CFMEU building, right? I wasn't there, you were. Your live footage was from the very front. You were there, and there was no one in between you and the front doors as people were throwing bottles and smashing windows. And with that, in that little moment where it went really crazy, you were right there. What was really striking was all of the other media were right down the back. They were way down the back trying to get a shot over everyone's heads. The contrast was almost comical. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about the media, and I don't even know if you necessarily know this, I know this because of some work that I did about 8 years ago. The Victorian government 8 years ago, and I believe it's gone up since then, but I don't have any new figures, were spending $300 million a year on advertising. $300 million a year. They are the single biggest buyer of advertising in Victoria. No one else spends more than what they do. And what that means is that even Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10, these guys that are meant to be commercial, they're meant to be unbiased, etc., they know that if they piss off the government, they lose a huge amount of their ad revenue. So what you just said before about, yeah, they could do a better job, but they don't want to, I think you're spot on. And it's not necessarily motivated by politics. I think it might be motivated by money. That if a producer really goes out there and starts to do a better job, they get pulled in by the bean counters. They get pulled in by the board who says, listen, you're about to piss Daniel Andrews off and we're going to lose $50 million a year in advertising revenue and we can't afford that. So
yeah,
anyway.
I mean, definitely. There's truth to that.
Yeah. So for what that's worth, just log that in the back of your brain. The Victorian government has been for at least a decade the biggest buyer of advertising, in Victoria, and I think that goes a long way to explaining the behaviour of our media. Now, I've got a lot of questions coming through. I'm watching all the questions as they come up here. A lot of people asking about the fact that you got a media sort of pass or permit or whatever. Now, I've chosen not to do that. You've chosen to do that. There's no right or wrong in that decision. But when did you kind of go, you know what, I am media now, and decide to go and get that?
Yeah, I mean, technically, in Australia, to cover something that's happening in the public as a citizen journalist, we live in such a country, you don't need such passes and, this kind of nonsense, right? Anyone can go pick up a camera or something and go document something that's happening in public. Like that's like one of the rights that we have in a free society. And the need to actually, register myself as a business with the intention of doing internet publishing and, this kind of news coverage was really brought on about the fact that the government started requiring these kind of documents, right, to be out
credentials.
Credentials, right? So that's the reason that I registered myself as a business with that intention for internet.
You've still been sprayed. You've still been sprayed with pepper spray. How many times now?
Yeah, so I've been caught in the crossfire and sprayed and tear gas. So sometimes I don't even know what it is, but at least two times. That's a new experience for me as well. Yeah.
Do you think it's caught in the crossfire, or do you think that sometimes they know who you are and they just want to give it to you anyway?
Look, I feel like it's just the times that I've seen it, it's been from, I would say, these kind of young police officers who are kind of a bit unaware of what they're doing. It's my interpretation of what's going on there, and they're being pretty indiscriminate in the way that they're using these types of measures. And I think everyone's kind of getting caught up in that. So, I mean, you can read into it however you like almost, and you can say it's intentional, it was targeted, whatever it is. Like, you'll never kind of know for sure.
Yeah, you'll never know.
But I always feel it's just the inexperience of some of the officers that are in a very kind of tense situation that possibly that, training never really put them for. So I don't know. It just feels like that to me. They weren't really prepared to deal with non-violent ordinary who are just kind of, asking basic questions of their government. Well,
you're the one who's there, so I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. You're on the front lines. I rarely get more than about 3 people or less than about 3 people deep. I tend to stay in the crowd, streaming from in there. You've got the guts and the courage and the balls to actually get all the way to the front. In fact, further than the front, you're usually like, there's the front, there's the cops, and you're somewhere in between the two. So I absolutely
look, it's not just me. Like there's so many of the freelance photographers and the especially the photographers, not many videographers, because a lot of the you might have noticed a lot of the actual videographers from the media, they have these like massive camera rigs. They're from some ancient time back in the day. I don't know what they're doing. A lot of the press photographers, a lot of the independent photographers, like they're up there. They got their, they've come equipped. They got their helmet. They know, and they're up there getting their shots. So it's not, that's kind of when I see them doing it initially, like you feel more comfortable to kind of also be in that situation, and that you can do that kind of coverage, and that's kind of what allowed me slowly to get to the front and get those shots as well. Seeing other people do it, so it's not so much so that I'm courageous. I've just seen others do it, and I've seen how they carry themselves, and they're very professional.
I've seen others do it, and I don't have the guts to go out there myself. So massive respect, mad respect to you for that level of commitment, particularly after you've was it so it was one of the days, I don't know which day it was, with the tradie protesters that have now been dubbed that Monday to Wednesday. You got pepper sprayed. Avi, I think, took you back to the car. You cleaned yourself up, and then you went back and kept on working and kept on filming. I don't know if that's crazy or courageous or how to describe that, but man, that's impressive. I will say that it's absolutely impressive that you do that. Is there any formation of a plan? You said that when you started, it was just you felt that it had to be documented. A few months have passed, or it's actually, I don't know, it might have even been almost a year or the better part of a year since that first protest that you came and videoed. I don't remember when that was. Has a plan formed for you? Are you charting a different future for yourself now? Or are you just hoping that this all ends and you can go back to the weddings? Where are you kind of sitting with all this now?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky to be, a small donor in the sense that I've been able to become, somewhat self-reliant throughout my years working in the wedding industry. And it comes with the ability to kind of, focus on different things as well. So changing in my career to something like this and taking this more seriously is something that I can actually do. It's an option that I have that I might have had if I had done a different career, for instance. So that flexibility, being in a similar field in terms of the equipment I use and access to kind of the tools and stuff that are also a part of the same tools that are used by the news media. That really allows me to pursue this as something serious. And a few months ago, I made the decision to kind of do that in a more kind of serious manner. And I think the recent events and what's happened recently around some of the work I've been doing, that it only kind of pushes me further to check myself and see where I can perhaps take this next and see what more I can do in this space. So yeah, it's definitely something that's organic initially, and now it's something that's possibly more like kind of how I built my business in the wedding industry, to something like where you can shoot a plan and kind of work around what you want to do in terms of setting goals. So yeah, I see the possibilities in terms of what I want to do myself, and that's just the honest way of saying that. That's just how I believe that's how people should be thinking, and something can be a hobby and turn into a passion, and that's how I got into the wedding industry, which has been very worked well for me. And I think people should be open to those kind of experiences in their life to change path and pivot and change careers if it suits.
Yeah. Well, hang on, let me scroll up here. As Jason's pointing out, very few people have a one-name cache, or one-name cachet. A Madonna, Beyonce, Oprah, Cher, Drake, Prince, Rukshan. It takes a certain something to get into that club, and you've just managed to rocket your way in there. But I want to caveat that, but I want to qualify that by saying I'm a massive fan of yours. I think I made that pretty clear in the intro, and I think you've earned it. And I would hate to see you disappear. Let's just say some magical thing happened and everything was restored and we were back to 2019 and all this madness was over. I would hate to lose your voice out of politics, because I don't think your value is just in the camera and what you look at and what you show. I think your value is also in your voice and in your attitude. One of the really striking things, and I'm about to say something that's really awkward and impossible for you to answer, so I'm going to say it and then I'm going to move on because there is no answer to this. You're an incredibly humble human being, right? And there's no answer to that. You can't sit there and say, well, actually, yes, I am. And nor can you sit there and say, well, actually, no, I'm not. So I'm going to move right on. But the voice that you bring and the humility that you bring and the willingness to, in the intensity of these moments, which some of them are crazy. You've been in crazier moments than what I've been in. Some of these moments are crazy. And yet, when you listen to the commentary that you're giving around those moments, it's incredibly level. It's incredibly level-headed and very, very humble. And I'm deeply grateful to you for what you do. And regardless of how this plays out, I certainly hope to see your voice in our media landscape, in our political landscape, wherever it is that this takes you. I hope to see you there. So now let me move on, because you can't respond to being called humble. There is no answer to that. So I want to get a little bit personal, if that's okay with you, because this is not just a job. I mean, it's not a job. It doesn't pay you anything. But it also reaches into your personal life. You've had police show up at your front door. You've been pepper sprayed and had those sorts of incidents on the street. I'm sure from time to time you get recognized on the street. This reaches far deeper into your life than just, I did a live stream, and I was at a protest and I did a live stream. Tell me a little bit about the impact of that, and how has it changed your way of being, given that I find myself worrying about the sound of doors slamming out the front of my house because I've had the police at my front door multiple times. I'm sure that you must have similar experiences. What's been some of the personal cost, and not just the cost, the change as a result of what's happened in the last year for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd like to think that it hasn't affected me too much in terms of who I am and what I aspire to be. But there's no denying that those kind of interactions do kind of shake certain foundations and beliefs that you have. And I think for me, it was a negative thing, some of those things, but I found a positive out of it as well.
Okay.
Having institutions like the police, institutions that very highly respect and believe in the need for, having my perceptions of them, challenged personally as well, in terms of I would characterize as behavior unbecoming of an institution like the police in a Western democracy, particularly around their handling of things like the media. The most recent example is them, trying to shut down helicopters from covering the protest.
Crazy.
These kind of things. Yeah, they challenge my kind of foundational views of where we are as a society in the world, and what role that individuals like myself in the media and stuff play. So I've looked at that and gone, it's only reaffirmed for me the importance of what I think I'm doing, and it's only pushed me to further pursue those avenues. As negative as everything has been, I think I've taken it in a positive stride and helped me kind of reaffirm my commitment to what I'm doing. And I don't know as an individual if I can affect change, but perhaps something that I film or something that I capture might lead to some sort of discussion that can ultimately, bring those issues to bear in the public in a manner that improves our relationship with police or authority or whatever. So I'm looking at it more in the positive way. As for like interactions with the public and those kind of things, it's I'm very kind of, I try to be myself, and I'm trying to be very respectful and calm and nice to everyone. I try not to judge people as well, and anyone that comes and talks to me or says hello, despite what their views might be and who they might be and whatever it is, I try to engage with them as a human being and respect them first as a person, because I feel like that's the way that I would like to be treated by others. So those kind of values are kind of instilled within me. So if you see me casually talking with people that maybe have disparaged me or something like this and laughing and smiling, it's not because I haven't ended like what or whatever, but it's just because I'm willing to give people a chance. And people are always human. We're all human, and we're capable of being more than what we've done in the past and more than our mistakes.
Look, you're proving what I just said about this incredible level approach that you just have, and I don't know, it seems to now be a part of who you are. So I'm going to say compliments to your parents or to your upbringing. I don't know what that looked like, but compliments to the people that shaped you, and compliments to you for the choices that you've made, because Not everyone has the ability to approach things the way that you just described, given the intensity of some of what you've been through and seen. I want to bring up Marco's comment here. Avi has a man crush on Rukshan. It was apparent in the duo video. Listen, I have a man crush on Rukshan, right? I'm going to make it awkward. If you don't have a man crush on Rukshan, what is wrong with you? Check your pulse, guys. Make sure you're alive, okay? The guy is a legend. The guy's awesome. Now, there was another comment here. Yes, from Damien. Rukshan, you have made a change. This is what I wanted to say. The fact, if it weren't for you, like even when I was live streaming before you joined and then you suddenly started getting the numbers that you got, when I was live streaming, sure, I would end up with 100,000, 150,000 views on a video, but live I had maybe 6,000, 7,000 people, okay? And that is not enough to force the media to start to be more honest. But when you live stream and you get 70,000, 100,000, sometimes 150,000 people watching live, I think that you are a key part of the reason why the media, and the language is important here. They used to call us right-wing nut jobs, Nazis, etc. And then they started calling us anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists. Now they say the protests are anti-mandatory vaccines. They're actually finally telling the truth. I don't think that would have happened were it not for the fact that you were doing what you did and you got as many views as you did. I think that change is 90% down to your live streams and the amount of people that you had watching your live streams. I mean, I sent you a text a little while ago saying, listen, right now you are the most important man in Melbourne, right? I wasn't buttering you up. That's genuinely my opinion. I think that you have single-handedly changed the narrative around what the media believed that they could get away with. They knew they couldn't lie the way that they could before because you were getting so many viewers on your footage. And again, I've said another thing that you can't react to. There's no way for you to reply to that. So I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna move on. Why? You said before you're a principled person. What is it about you? Why do you think freedom is important, choice is important, or even let's put that aside. Why do you think truth is important? Why were you so offended by the idea that the media weren't being honest to you when you watched those reports and you went, hang on, I don't feel like you're telling me the truth here? Why did you feel that way? Because there's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of people that just swallow it. What is it about you, your upbringing, your faith, your childhood, your schooling? Can you pinpoint anything that actually might be the source of that?
Yeah, I probably can't pinpoint any particular thing, but just overall, like, for me, it's not so much about what the government's trying to institute, for instance. It's the manner in which they do it. So if they want to institute, as an example, mandatory vaccination, if they're being upfront, people being transparent and being level with people and actually telling them, like, this is why we're doing this and this is the legal reasoning, this is the backing, this and that. That's very different to the government doing something and not telling people why they're doing something.
Yeah, so and not being honest
and not being honest. So in between that space of them, in those two descriptions that I gave, there is a truth there, and it's that kind of truth that can actually make either change, make a difference, or actually allow people to have those discussions and have those debates. Because if you just demonize a group of people, if you just demonize a section of your community, let's say it's 10% of in Victoria who are for these protests or whatever it is, just as a number. If the only way that if the only way as a government and as leadership and the media you approach those people is just to demonize them and to devalue what they're saying, then as a society, we've already lost at that point, because there's something going on there that shouldn't be happening in a country like Australia, right? But if you could actually hear those people, humanize them, listen to them, and actually really hear what they're saying, even if it doesn't go the way of what they want, even if it doesn't achieve the goals that they want with these protests, whatever it is, it's important that that discussion is actually had in an open and transparent manner. And I think governments, you see it all the time. You see Daniel Andrews get up there and, I don't even know what they're protesting about. That is the worst kind of leadership that you could have. No, I'm serious. That's the kind of crap you see in, like, in the third world, in parts of the world where there is actual dictatorships and there is poor leadership and authoritarians that behave in this manner. And it's not so much what saying, or what are they protesting about? An authoritarian goes, well, I don't care what they're protesting about. Daniel Andrews is on the edge of saying that. He doesn't realize, but he's on the edge of saying that. Doesn't matter what these people are saying, what they're doing. I don't even want to know what they're doing. And that is very, very dangerous and poor leadership in a country, in a Western liberal democracy, in a country like Australia. And I think for me, that truth is just allowing those voices to be heard, allowing those discussions to happen. And then, from that, the outcome that comes from that is more pure than the outcome that you get from just, politicians just having their way without being challenged.
Yeah. I have nothing to add. That exactly. David asked a great question here. Rukshan may very well be our modern unsuspecting David in a story of Goliath. Let me put a slightly different spin on the same idea. And I sent this to you in a text, Rukshan, to your other phone. I don't know whether you saw it, and it probably seemed weird. I don't know. But I sent you a text and I said, you're Moses, right? Now, there's a story in the Bible of there's a battle going on and the children of Israel are fighting against, I don't even remember who. And Moses has to stand there and keep his arms raised. And for as long as he keeps his arms raised, they're winning. And his arms, of course, start to get tired and they drop. But when his arms drop, they start to lose the battle. And so other people get around Moses and Aaron and there's someone else and then hold up his arms and keep his arms raised. And I honestly, I said it and I meant it. Like, for as long as your arms are up and you've got that camera in your hand and you are showing the world what's going on, we're kind of winning. Like, automatically at that point, it almost doesn't matter what's happening. The truth of what's happening is getting out there. And that was just, genuinely, I think you were just such a game changer just by getting out there with that camera. From your perspective, and you've got obviously family background from Sri Lanka, you seem to me, as much as you came into this sort of halfway through all the protests and from everything I've heard you say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I need to frame the question. From everything that I've heard you say, you're not a hardcore, crazy libertarian like what I am. You're not some nut job freedom fighter, whatever. Okay, but this is a great comment. This bloke has answered more questions in an hour than Daniel Andrews has in 5 years. Absolutely, and he answers the questions straight too, which I appreciate. What is freedom to you? Why does this matter? Why do you care about what's happening in Victoria?
Yeah, look, I mean, I have been blessed to have grown up in Australia. I'll take all of Australia, to be an Australian and to grow up in this country, and the opportunities that I've had growing up here. It's remarkable. Like, unless you see the difference, which I've also been able to see because of my extended family back home in Sri Lanka. I know the difference between what it means to grow up in Australia and grow up in a different country. And that's not to disparage Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is an amazing country, and it's amazing to live there as well. But there's a difference in the countries, and it's the reason that I've told people this before, that there's people in Sri Lanka and other parts of the world that wake up every day thinking, I get out of here, can I go somewhere else? And for me, when I wake up in Australia, that's not what I think. I think, wow, I've got these opportunities, I can do something. And I think for a lot of Australians, they're not waking up in this country going, I need to get out of here, right? Maybe not till recently.
Things might have changed in the last year, but up until then,
maybe, right? But this is an amazing country, and I think maybe the immigrants like myself who have had this kind of upbringing and we see the differences, maybe we appreciate it more. I don't know. I don't want to make that assumption, but that could be a bit to do with it. But things like freedom, things like the opportunities that I have here, being able to walk around and not be afraid of authority as well. In Sri Lanka, you couldn't get away with saying stuff about the police commissioner or the prime minister or whatever it is, right? For a world of hurt, it's a different ball game. And there's people that are brave and that challenge those. There's activists there and there's journalists that do that. But I'm saying as an everyday person to challenge authority in a country like that, you can't do that. So we're blessed and lucky to be able to, you have John Howard, like back in the day, I go back to John Howard, have him like jogging through the streets of Sydney or whatever near Kirribilli House. You don't get that overseas. So to have that kind of thing in this country is amazing. So you want to preserve that, right? You want to ensure that my children and their children after that are able to still live in a country that's beautiful and free like that, and that they don't wake up one day and go, well, how do we leave this place? So
100%.
There is that thing that interests me about freedom and rights and these kind of concepts that I find value in the fact that I feel like I have an attachment to a place where those things don't exist in the same way. So that's probably what informs some of my views.
Well, you said you don't want to make assumptions about whether or not immigrants are perhaps more likely to be in favor of freedom, etc. But I want to make the assumption. So this is me. This is not Rukshan. This is me. Blame me if you're unhappy about this. I've noticed as I attend these rallies and as I look at who's sending me messages, it is disproportionately first and second generation immigrants. Now, we are a country of immigrants. Like, there's a huge number of immigrants in this country. So you'd expect a large number already, but the number is completely disproportionate. I'm a fifth generation Aussie. I'm almost as Aussie as you can get without being Aboriginal. Like, you would have to have Indigenous blood in order to be more Aussie than what I am. My wife, just by pure fluke, is basically the same, right? But in terms of the people actually getting active and pushing back against this, we're in the minority. The majority are people that have come from, whether it's the subcontinent, whether it's from Asia, whether it's from South America, whether it's from Eastern Europe. As I talk to people at these protests, and as I talk to people that message my page, it is overwhelmingly people that have a relatively recent family history with some form of dictatorship, whether it's communist, whether it's fascist, whether it's whatever it may have been. It's overwhelmingly these people. Let me frame it as a question. But this is my personal sort of thesis, and I would, if you disagree with this genuinely, I want you to disagree and help me to think through this better. But my theory is that Australians who have only ever known Australia, we've gotten lazy and we've taken it for granted, and we think that this is normal. We don't have that international perspective on what life can be like. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, like especially in the last 20 months with everything's transpired, there is some sort of truth to that. And a part of it would be just like you and I have this kind of laid back Aussie larrikin style attitude, right? That's kind of ingrained into you from a very young age. And I have a lot of that as well. And like a lot of my attitudes towards a lot of things in life is that, oh, it'll be fine, it's all good.
Yeah, she'll be right. And she'll be right, mate.
Yeah, right. You hear that a lot, right? And we look at government and we think that, they're going to do what's best for us. And, all these crazy things they're doing right now, they'll just drop that at a beat of a hat and, they'll move on. And that's not always the case. And you can look to, the US after 9/11 and they, came in with the Patriot Act and, that was all about, dealing with terrorists overseas and stuff. And over time, what happened was that those laws and rules that they brought in were actually turned against the people of the country, against America themselves. And at the start, everyone kind of supported all those things because it's about something else, right? It's about fighting this whole terrorism. And I think in a way, with a lot of this stuff that's happening around the pandemic and the way that the laws are going and the rules are going, the normalization of believing that government alone and that these authorities alone dictates the path that a country is, I think is wrong. I think it's always going to be, it should be a part of a conversation with the people itself as well. So we have seen that over the last 20 months, governments, especially in Victoria, have failed to take the people along with them, to take the people on that journey. And they have treated people like they're an obstacle, like they are in the way of their policies and the decisions and the things that they want to do, which is, when that kind of thing starts happening on a regular basis, with a lot of detachment from the actual impact it's having on people's lives. It's dangerous territory because it normalizes that behavior. And I feel like if it's not challenged in many different ways, whether it's through the courts or protest or whatever it is, if that's not challenged and people don't arc up about it, you're going to be in a situation where that is, the COVID normal forever, which is where authorities and governments believe that, at the drop of a hat, they can just institute whatever they want.
Well, I don't remember who originally said it, but there's a quote that I can't attribute because I don't remember. There is nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. And, you brought up 9/11 a couple of times. And I think that's a case in point. I mean, we just saw, 3 weeks ago, we just saw the anti-terror squad deployed on the streets of Melbourne with an armored vehicle shooting rubber bullets on site at people who they thought might have been protesters. It wasn't even like a formed up protest. It was just, we think you're a protester. We're going to shoot at you now. This was the anti-terror squad. These were the people that we were told that we needed in order to deal with terrorists. Now they're dealing with protesters.
100%. Like the justification, like the militarization of the police force in America over the last 20 years was mainly as a result of their response to 9/11, where they gave police forces all these extra funds, all these new weapons and stuff to use in those terrorist type situations. But we're seeing increasingly it's being against people, their own citizens, and that's how it kind of creeps in and it stays. And some of the policies that we're seeing right now in terms of our response to COVID, these things will be here for a long time. And I think people are kidding themselves if they believe that it just you just click your fingers and all this is gone. It's not. It's actually here, and it's going to take a lot to unwind some of this stuff, and it's going to take a lot of strong, brave leadership from a lot of people to make sure that we take some of this stuff back.
Well, it's the expression, you can vote your way into totalitarianism, but you have to shoot your way out of it. Let's hope that we never ever get to that point. We've never been there on this continent. Let's try and keep it that way. Look, I'm very mindful that we're approaching 9:30 and I need to take a break. I had a revolt on my hands in the early days of the slow chat. We would go for 3 hours, 4 hours, and people were demanding that I had to give them a break. So we're going to do that now. And what I'm going to do, actually, just before we do that, let me just bring this up. This is the documentary that I am working on at the moment and fundraising for at the moment. So please, if you're interested in learning more about if you're interested in supporting a documentary that is putting the argument from the point of view of the people that opposed all of what happened, then please go to, actually, let me just put this into the comments here. There's a URL for the fundraiser. Oops, let me delete that. There we go. It is givesendigo.com/battleground Melbourne. I'm not going to give a big promo for it. If you want to know more about it, go to my page, Tophet Field on Facebook, or also the URL is on my Instagram as well, and you can support that. So that's enough about that for now. But what we're going to do is I'm just going to quickly, during the break, play you the speech that I gave during the protest that it turns out, I didn't know this, it turns out this was the very first protest that Rukshan actually attended. And this is my speech that I gave during that protest. That's going to be your entertainment during the break. Refill your cup of tea, refill your glass of whiskey, whatever it is that you need to do. Go to the loo. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. And after the loo break, those of you that have done slow chats with me before, after the loo break, that's usually when things get a little bit deeper. We've covered a whole bunch of topics. After the loo break, I think we're going to get a little bit deeper. So stick around for that. And in the meantime, enjoy this speech from me from 2020.
As the worst violator of human rights that Victoria has ever seen! 2020 will be remembered as our year of shame! A year when our state resembled a tin pot dictatorship! Our parliament is suspended! We are denied our basic as the worst violator of human rights that Victoria has ever seen! Daniel Andrews and his gang believe that they can get away with murder. We are here at the Shrine of Remembrance for a reason. Daniel Andrews is unworthy to lead a state that is built on the sacrifice of our ancestors. He dishonors their legacy each and every day by denying their descendants the freedoms they fought for. No mistake, this is about human rights. Even the Assistant Commissioner Chief Wiggum, sorry. Acknowledged yesterday that our right to protest is a human right and it exists regardless of what the Chief Health Officer says. But it's a right that we've been denied for months. We've been subject to arrest, violence, intimidation, harassment and bullying at the hands of the Victorian government and their enforcers for exercising what even they now admit is our human right. But Daniel Andrews is taking all our rights. We have the right to free assembly, to free movement, to freedom of religious expression, and we have the right to our own private property, including our jobs and our businesses. All of those rights have been trampled, and that makes Daniel Andrews the worst violator of human rights that this state has ever seen. Daniel Andrews is unfit for office. He is surrounded by the stench of corruption. He's stonewalling the inquiries that seek to find the truth, and he's been caught out lying time and time again, and he's running from the consequences of his own actions. Daniel Andrews must go. Lockdowns must go today. With broad terms of reference must be established, and charges must be laid. We need to open up the state while the weather is warm, while their hospitals have capacity, while we can protect the sick. No more fear! 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 Andrews is too proud, too incompetent, and too far out of his depth. He's still treating this like it's March, like we've learned nothing new since March. We can protect the lives of the vulnerable and the elderly without destroying the lives of the young. But first, Daniel Andrews must go! Down with Dan! Down with Dan! Down with Dan! Down with Dan! Down with Dan!
And as you can imagine, it took about a week for my voice to recover after that particular little speech. So I thought that was a relevant one to bring up for our little break. Not that Rukshan needed a break, of course. He's used to videoing weddings, so he can go for 10 hours at a time without needing to do a loo break. But I don't have that ability. I don't have the iron bladder. But I thought that was relevant because the corruption issue is coming back right now. We've just seen IBAC. They've been asking some questions, sniffing around. There's some things heating up in that department, which it had gone quiet for a while. But the stench of corruption that I talked about last year has come back to haunt Daniel Andrews in no uncertain terms, which is, let's be honest, it's a very nice thing to see. So for those of you that are just joining us, because I can see that a few people just have, we are slow chatting with Rukshan tonight. I'm going to very quickly bring back the, here it is. I should apologize for the technical issues during the playing of that video. I apologize for the video freezing for a little while there. So this is the documentary that I'm working on right now. You can find the fundraiser for it at givesendgo.com/battleground Melbourne. I'm just going to post the link into the chat here. If you would like to help make this documentary a reality, you can read all about it at the link that I've just posted and decide whether you would like to support it or not. Of course, I would appreciate it if you would and help to make that possible. But even if you're not in a position, if you're struggling, please don't donate, right? Look after yourself, look after your family first. but please help to spread the word. You can at least share it and let other people know about what's going on. Okay, enough of that. I'm going to bring back Rukshan. Now, we're in a really interesting moment in time where an enormous amount of damage has been done in our state between people's trust in the government, the relationship between the police and the people. And there's a lot of people, and I know this, and I'm sure you get the same thing, people messaging the page saying, how do we come back from this? How do we even get out of this mess? How can we ever go back to a life resembling what we had? Because you were right. What you said earlier is absolutely spot on. Australia has been an amazing place to be alive. You know, I was born here in 1982. I won the freaking lottery, right? Of everywhere that I could have been born, out of all the moments in history I could have been born, to be born here in 1982, in the 1980s, I won the lottery. No doubt about that in my mind. But things have changed in the last year and a half. Do you think it's possible for us to come back from this? Do you think it's possible for us to actually rediscover the Australia that I know from my childhood and you would remember from the 1990s?
Oh, look, I think so. You know, we definitely have the character and the will to kind of, you know, rebuild those things. And I think it's going to be a longer process than what many kind of think. As I said before, we don't snap our fingers and things aren't going to go back, right? It's going to be a long process. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to community engagement in terms of how people engage with each other afterwards, because the destructive thing, it's been destructive, a lot of things that have happened, right? Some of it's been out of control of the government in terms of, you know, this virus coming and all this kind of stuff, right? Let's say that's out of the control of governments. But other destructive things which are coming out, whether it's through the creation of, you know, segregating society through using you know, vaccine passports and things like this, right? It's very destructive in the way that communities kind of interact with each other, right? You're creating these two classes of people almost. And, you know, don't let the media fool you and tell you that only a small percentage of people are in this mind frame. So many people who are, you know, vaccinated or they've done all these things are still upset about what's happening to our society in terms of the way that we're treating each other. And I think that kind of damage that's going to take longer to heal, because the government, you know, the police, all these authorities have done the lazy thing, which is just to demonize people. And once you go down that path, it's hard to, you know, rebuild that trust in the community between different groups of people. And they're doing that now because it's easier for them to use those tactics to achieve policy objectives. But that has long-term ramifications. And I think, you know, that's going to be the hardest to come back from. But I think even from that, we will. But it's going to take a while, and we might need to see a lot of accountability. And I know that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. Example, if I could give an example, you know, as for instance with the police force, for instance, with some of the things that have been happening, you know, I'm realistic enough to know that you don't blame individual members of the police. You don't blame people, you know, that have no control in terms of what the policies were, for instance. But accountability perhaps can come from the top in terms of their actions going forward. So those kind of things, I think, really need to happen. If we just end up in a situation where the governments turn around and say, like, well, we did everything we had to do, it was for the best, and deal with it, I think that's going to not, you know, be conducive to actually going forward. You're going to need to have governments come out and say, you know, we fucked up here, we made mistakes, we screwed up. Whether that's through, you know, resigning, doesn't matter what form they do it in. I'm saying there has to be that kind of back and forth. It can't just be like we had to go through that because that's just how it was. I don't think that kind of technique is going to allow the community to heal.
It's such a hard thing, and I really struggle with the police side of things. And those that follow my work, you'll know that I've been an advocate for finding common ground, for forgiveness, for finding a way to move forward. But I've got to say, the more this drags on, the harder I'm finding it to practice what I preach. The harder I'm personally, just emotionally, if I'm honest with myself, it's getting harder and harder to accept, for example, there was that police officer who was on camera. Someone was filming sort of surreptitiously when they were in the riot gear, and they were talking about the fact that they had to feed their own kids. Okay. And they were doing their job. They didn't have other skills was one of the things that they said. They couldn't go and get some other job. And on the one hand, I can completely get where he's coming from, right? I get that. But there's a part of me that just says, yes, but in order to feed your kids, you're stopping other people from feeding theirs. And can't you see how evil that is? Can't you, the protesters are saying, we want everyone to be able to feed their kids. The police are saying, I need to feed my kids, so I'm going to stop you from feeding yours. Like it's hard. And the more this drags on, the harder it's kind of getting for me. I think back to, and this is an extreme example, I'm not making a parallel between where we are and where they were. That's not at all my point. But to take an even more extreme example, when you look at the Nuremberg trials following the Second World War, and when the Allies won the war and they realized that they were not in a position where they could punish every single SS member, every single German prison guard, all of the people that had served the Nazi regime, they couldn't give them all what they deserved. It wasn't practicable. It wasn't, if they did that, they would be ripping society apart and keeping, hundreds of thousands of people in prison and executing tens of thousands of people. And it just wasn't possible. How do we resolve this? Because I know there's a lot of people that are worse off even than me in terms of how they're feeling. How do we find that forgiveness? How do we find the balance between the ones that we hold accountable and the ones that we forgive?
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking for myself here. I don't necessarily see the culpability of the everyday police officer in that way. It's just my personal take on this. Okay. I kind of sympathize with what that police officer said in his circumstances. At the end of the day, for me, a lot of this comes down to just poor leadership. If I'm going to blame anyone in the police, I would blame, Shane Patton or, for instance, Luke Cornelius as well. Yeah, you see that in the way they talk, in the language, in the way they describe people. That goes from up down. It's about top down, right? How those attitudes impact how people below them behave as well. And I know we do hold individuals responsible for their actions, and I totally get that. And I think people think when I'm filming, for instance, when I'm filming police interactions, and I'm doing it in a way to, these kind of gotcha moments with the police. It's nothing like that. No. It's more about actually protecting the institution and the sanctity of, policing, because I believe they're vital institutions in our community. And we need to ensure that our police officers are not put in these kind of scenarios where they're policing the public in this manner. To think that people are being in the police being to, 6 people to tackle an individual because they're not wearing a mask or they're outside their radius in that manner, to think that this is the way that they think it should be done, the people higher up. It's just crazy that these people are being put in these situations. And I know we can say they can refuse to do their job and all this kind of stuff, but we all know how pressure works, and we all know how we're put in these situations. And I mean, I totally get what some people say, and I totally understand their frustrations. But in defense of, I know a lot of police officers as well, and I have mates who are police officers, and I know their character, and I know that they're not people that would be enjoying doing what they're doing. I'm not saying there's a small percentage of people that
there are some, but you're right in the main, but they're not. Yeah.
No, they're not, because they're also a part of the community, and you're seeing that in the country communities where they're having protests and interactions with the police. The police officers are there that in those communities are very much more reluctant to engage with their community in this manner, because it's being more humanized. Like, they're in that community. And I think the police here in the city of Melbourne are actually bussing people in from outside of town, like a mob boss would do, to beat people down and institute their rules. So it's everyone's in kind of this situation.
Look, it's hard, and I want to get back to the point, because I was there only a month and a half ago. I was there, and I'm struggling. I've found myself. I'm not naturally an angry person. I'm by nature, I am someone very ready to forgive. I am who I am because other people gave me second chances over the years, and second chances that you could argue I didn't deserve, right? So I am 100% on the side of second chances. And if someone is going to turn around and say, you know what, I was wrong, I admit that I was wrong, and I'm going to learn from that, and I'm going to do better in the future, then absolutely that second chance, 100%. I mean, I'm a Christian, and Christianity is all about forgiveness, and I don't deserve the forgiveness that I've received. It was just given to me, undeserved, and it's my responsibility now to be able to give that same forgiveness to others. But man, it just feels hard when you see armored cars going down the street, when you see people shooting rubber bullets at unarmed protesters. It's just freaking hard. Look, I hope to be able to get back to that point and to get to what you're expressing there, because the truth is, when this is over, and I hope to reach a point someday where we can declare that it's over, we have to move forward. We will still have police. We will still have politicians. We will still have a community, and we have to find a way to be able to kind of coexist and move forward with that community. In terms of the accountability side of things, in terms of that distinction that you made earlier, and I appreciate that there are some that we need to hold accountable, and there are some that we need to forgive. We need to accept that the frontline officers perhaps made bad choices, but they were following orders, and they were in a culture where that was what was done, and maybe we need to make grace for that. What's your read, and are you across what's happening at the moment with IBAC with Daniel Andrews? Because honestly, with the documentary and the launch of the fundraiser and everything else, I haven't really stayed across that particularly well. Are you across that at the moment?
Look, not in a meaningful way to actually add to the discussion. More so, it's just saying that in these kind of scenarios, I think what you saw in New South Wales in terms of what Gladys Berejiklian did, stepping aside. I can't speak to her reasons exactly, but there comes a point when certain leaders make choices about what's best for the community and for the country, and I think she might have made a decision along those lines. Maybe she had other reasons as well. So, what's happening right now in Victoria with all these investigations and corruption and this and that, and it's hard to actually read exactly what's it about and how much political, in the sense that trying to score some political points and hold Dan to the same kind of standards as Gladys, and she did that and he should do all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Sure. But at the end of the day, the most important thing here is, especially with like what happened with the WorkSafe investigations and their findings, you would want, as an individual, as a business owner, as a citizen of Victoria, you would want people in positions of power, whether that's the Premier or the Commissioner of Police, whoever it is, you would want them to be held to the same standards that you put guys to. So, I am, if we were to be ruthless in the way that we deal with politicians and it has to be in the same manner that we do it to the little guy. And I think that's where we see sometimes that people in positions of power get away with things, whereas an ordinary business, if they were responsible for like the hotel quarantine saga, would be in a bit more trouble and facing potential criminal charges at an individual level, as opposed to what's happening right now with the Department of Health being held responsible. So I think there is that power imbalance, that imbalance between those who are in positions of authority and just the everyday person. And I think those things are what bother me, and I would like to see that kind of be justice or equality in that sense. And I know it's a pipe dream, maybe, especially in Victoria. Well, I don't think Dan is Gladys. I don't think Dan's the kind of guy to fall on his sword.
No, Dan is going to go down fighting all the way, and Dan is going to go to his grave believing that he was right. You don't have to agree with this, but I've said before, and I'll say it again, that in my opinion, Dan is a psychopath. And not in like the Hollywood axe murdering psychopath sense, but if you go to the dictionary and you read the definition of a psychopath and you read the symptoms and you compare it to what we've seen from Daniel Andrews, it is my personal opinion that he is a genuine psychopath. And supposedly, psychologists say that around about 1 out of every 100 people born is a psychopath. And the top end of the corporate world and the top end of the political world are very attractive places for those people. So that's my personal opinion on that. So I think he's going to go down fighting all the way. He's going to take a lot of people down with him. But the question really, and it's not a question that any of us can answer at this moment, but in terms of us moving forward and being able to cross these divides. I mean, the government has invested so much energy dividing us into different camps, the vaxxed, the unvaxxed, the science believers versus the anti-science. I mean, they've used all this language designed to divide us and to separate us. In order for us to bridge those divides and come back again, putting aside the politics, putting aside what does or does not happen with Daniel Andrews, what can we do at a community level, at a local level, that might make some level of difference? Do you have anything to sort of input on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a tough one. Just from what I sense, I think it'll get to a stage where, just being Australians, we'll just kind of move on and we'll look back at that time and just be like, that was stupid and we shouldn't have done that, and just kind of, I'm being serious. Like, we'll just kind of move on and, I just feel like that's kind of the way that it ends, where people just like, this is stupid, mate. Like, this unvaxxed vax thing is just, but screw decisions. So I think that will be the kind of thing that changes things. It's at the individual, at the community level, like you said. I don't think it will be some sort of or something like this from the government. I think it's just humans will just be like, whatever, that whole period of time, let's just forget about it.
Well, you've given me a new thought that I haven't actually had until literally this moment. I would say, and we talked about this before, the she'll be right attitude of Australians is partly responsible for the mess that we're in. But maybe in the end, the she'll be right attitude is actually going to be part of what gets us through and gets us out the other side.
Yeah, it can go.
I don't know.
Go both ways, right? Yeah, it can go both ways.
Maybe that'll be the saving grace in the very end. So I get a lot of questions, and I'm sure you do too, of people saying, "Oh, Topher, Rukshan, can you do a video about this? Can you talk about that thing? There's all these people that have their own, issues that they're facing, and they're real, and they want someone to speak on their behalf." I tend to be of the view, I tend to say to these people, you speak out, you start a page, you do your own thing. What do you say to people that come to you with something that a grievance that they have, and they're asking you to try and take up the fight for them?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had the same view as you for a while, but I think I see my role as maybe a bit different. So I'm always willing to listen to people and see if there's an avenue for me to kind of cover that story, or I've been doing that a lot. I've been having a lot of discussion with people in terms of their personal stories, right? Everyone has some sort of thing that they're struggling with, especially these days. So I feel like there is a place for people to be that go-between medium in terms of getting these kind of ideas out there. It's very, I know everyone can kind of start a page or put out a video and things like this, and of course, people should do those things. I think it's important, but there is a way that, like, it can be done in a certain manner that presents it to an audience in a certain manner as well, certain medium. So there's a place for that as well. So I'm kind of in the middle of the road. I totally believe that people should actually get out there and get their stories out, but they should also reach out and spread it in other ways as well, whether it's through independent journalists like myself or through the mainstream media, whichever avenue that they think they need to go. But there's room for both.
I'm going to derail the conversation slightly here, because this is a great question from Deborah. It's a great question because I found out that I've been mispronouncing your name for a long time, and for all I know, I might still be. So we need Rukshan to pronounce his name. I've heard it sound different from different people. Could you please set the record straight for my sake and everybody else's? How do we say your name?
Yeah, it's Rukshan.
Rukshan. Okay. All right. Fantastic.
Rukshan,
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. From the man himself. That is how we properly pronounce Rukshan's name. So From your point of view, have you had the thought cross your mind that you might need to leave Australia? Have you reached that point at all across this journey, or is that not really? You're here, you're fighting for Australia, and this is where you're going to stay?
Yeah, no way. There's nowhere else to go. But there's no way I'd think about leaving this country. So,
fair enough.
100%. I'm here for the long run. Here for the fight.
See, it's interesting, and as I talk to a lot of either first or second generation immigrants, I get this real divide. Some of them are actually turning around and heading back, to their ancestral country, whether that's in Poland, in the case of some, Romania in the case of others that I personally know, and many more that I've chatted to, and others are sitting there saying, "No, I'm not going back. This is still better, and we just need to fight for what we have here." Do you ever worry that the fight is not going to be won? Do you find yourself worrying that we're going to become another Venezuela, or we're going to become another South Africa, or a place like that where, yes, good people stood up in those places as well. Good people stood up and fought the good fight, and they were not able to turn the tide. And in the end, they're suffering the consequences of losing that battle. Do you worry that might be Australia?
Look, I think Australia will only ever find itself in such a dire scenario as those countries if we stop fighting. I think it's a constant battle and exchange of ideas, and there has to be those of us who are willing to defend certain ideals and certain things that make this country what it is. And I think that ongoing fight is very important, and I think there'll be a lot of back and forth in terms of where we head as a country, especially with all the changes around the world in other similar nations as well. There's lots of changes going on, lots of dynamics changing as well within our own region. Yeah. If we look at China and all kind of stuff in the Pacific, so as a country, I think it's important that we continue to actually have these open discussions, these battle of ideas. I think that's what kind of creates our character. And, we shouldn't be stagnant. We should definitely change. Like in the next 10 years, we have to change, and things about, things that were common 10 years ago are different today. And it's not always in the negative, if that makes sense. Like a lot of the change is positive. So it's just about maintaining that balance and not going one way so drastically that it impedes on, who we are as a people. And that we can no longer recognize what Australia is. And that's the worry, because some of the rhetoric that you're getting from certain sections of the community, they are more geared towards totally redefining what this country means. And I think that conversation can't just happen on one side. It has to be a continuous battle of ideas, and that's what I'm here for, that battle. And I think it's important.
Can I put you on the spot? This is not something that I briefed you on or asked you about beforehand. So I'm genuinely putting you on the spot. And I'm going to ask the question, and then I'm going to crap on for a minute or two to give you an opportunity to think about it. My question is, what does Australia actually mean? One of the real struggles that I have as a fifth generation Australian myself, married to a fifth generation Australian, just purely by fluke, is, who are we actually? And there are a lot of people that try and tell us that we're racists, that we are intolerant, that we're horrible people, that we did horrible things to the Indigenous population when the first settlement happened here, that we're a part of imperialism. There's a lot of people that want to try and tear Australia down. Your parents came here for a reason. There was something about this place that made them go, I'm going to move my entire family and our entire future out of Sri Lanka, and we're going to come here. So if I can put you on the spot, and I'm sorry, but if I can put you on the spot, in your opinion, what is Australia? What is it that you're actually defending by doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very hard question. But
that's why I ask
terms, it. Yeah, to put it in simple terms, like, here, I'm here. This is Australia, like me. So, you have this, scrawny little Sri Lankan kid that comes here very young, grows up in Dandenong, goes to school, goes to law school, drops out, starts a business, then gets thrust into all this stuff and starts doing independent journalism. And now I'm here talking to you, Topher. So for me, that's what I see as Australia, is kind of place where almost anything is possible. There's opportunity. Yes, there's history, but what country doesn't have history, right?
Sadly,
there's conflict. There's conflict. There's issues, but amongst all of that, it's a nation that's allowed people like myself to reach great heights in the way that we can, support ourselves and our families and our future. And not just me, but you see so many immigrants, young immigrants here, and new immigrants coming, new families coming, building a life in Australia. And I think Australia, in many ways, twice this part of the human aspirations, and we are lucky not to be in the same situation as countries, the United States or England, who have a much more complex history and much bigger issues in terms of the stuff that they're dealing with conflict within societies. In Australia, that conflict is, it's there, it's definitely there, but it's in a certain area, right? And those are issues that we're of course still dealing with, like you brought up just there. But as an entire nation, people can still thrive in this country if they want to. So for me, that's what typifies Australia. And I know that's not a direct answer, and I've kind of waffled on there. But well said. I'm trying to give people a sense that it can be anything at the moment, Australia, but that's kind of the beauty of it, and that's what I think, at least.
Look, it's beautifully said. And there was a striking moment for me on the Wednesday of the so-called tradie protests when we found ourselves back at the shrine. That was the one day of that 3 days of protest that I did actually get to. We found ourselves back at the shrine, and I remember a moment where the crowd started chanting, Rukshan, 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 Rukshan. And I found myself sitting there. I was back in the crowd at that point in time. I wasn't down anywhere near you, but I found myself sitting there going, how many countries in the world are there where someone who is an immigrant, in your case, who by simply doing what you've done can become this kind of cultural hero, this cult hero? We get told by the ABC and various other people all the time that we're this racist country and we're horrible people and everything else. And I look around, and you've brought this out yourself in your coverage. I think it was on the Tuesday. So on the Monday, everything happened out the front of the CFMEU. John Setka came out and said it was a bunch of baby Nazis, I think was the expression used, and that got picked up in the media and everything else. And then the following day, if I remember rightly, I'd love you to fill me in on this, you were walking around asking people if they were Nazis, if I can remember that correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I was just, poking a little fun there because I had heard Bill Shorten the day before calling everyone baby neo-Nazis or something. So I was just kind of trying to show that, look, most of the crowd probably doesn't fit the stereotype that they've put on. That's what that was about. I think some people took that very seriously, that I'm trying to, prove a very serious point. But no, it was just poking a bit of fun at the way that it's been characterized in the media and showing that actually, look, there are different people. You can't characterize these people the way that you want to. It's not that easy to look at this topic and just say, these are these people.
And for me, it's almost been one of these beautiful sort of moments where the media have tried very hard to once again, I mean, this is a constant thing. We're being told that we're so horrible and we're so racist and everything else. And yet here, you look around that crowd, you look at your footage, your coverage of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and how incredibly multicultural the people that were showing up to protest actually were. The crowd chanting your name. I mean, this is not an English name, right? Rukshan. It's not a name that's familiar in the Anglosphere. We're familiar with it now in Australia because obviously we've had a huge immigrant population as a part of our life for decades now. But here they are celebrating you and chanting your name. And to me, that says more about the Australian character than many other things that I've seen recently. So I'm struggling with this question. I asked you the question for a reason. I'm struggling with this question. Who actually are we? When we defend Australia, what are we defending?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not with our problems, right? And going to the issue of around racism and things like this, of course, there's aspects of this, and you find this all over the world. But is it a racist country? No, I mean, not in my experience. Definitely not. It's never been. It's never been the way I look. My name, all these kind of things have never been something that's stopped me from doing what I'm doing. So, in the way that it's being played in the media, I think I don't agree with it. I don't believe that, because people like me are sometimes portrayed as the victim class, that we need some sort of help, that all these organizations and all these certain political parties are geared towards ensuring that we're elected and we're kept safe from all the racist Australians, and that's not close to the reality of the actual situation for a lot of immigrants. A lot of us just get on with our life, and we build our lives here. So, and with a lot of help from many different people in the community, all sorts of Australians. So, I think the characterization as this being, a racist nation and things like this, I think it's just, again, this oversimplification of complex topics by the media to kind of suit a narrative. That it doesn't make sense with the way that the immigrant population in this country has been very successful. It just doesn't make sense.
I grew up in Preston, which is in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. It's now considered inner city. Back then it was not. But just north of Preston was the suburb of Reservoir. And that was where an enormous number of Italians and Greeks had settled. And I can remember from the 1980s, the big fear campaign at the time was around the Lebanese. Oh, the Lebanese are coming in and they're having gangs and they're doing all the, they're organized crime. It's Lebanese organized crime. That was the big scare campaign from the late 80s, which is my earliest sort of memory of this sort of stuff. But I remember Reservoir, the suburb just north of where we were in Preston, and the houses were beautiful. They were double story. They had amazing architecture. They had amazing landscaping and everything else. And that's where the Greeks and the Italians lived. And it struck me, even at a very early age, as a conservative. I was brought up in a conservative household, low immigration. We want to control the number of people coming to the country. We want to make sure it's only the right people are coming into the country, all that sort of stuff. It struck me as I used to ride my bike a lot, and I'd ride through Reservoir, and I enjoyed riding through Reservoir because the houses were just interesting to look at and much nicer than the house I grew up in. And realizing these people had come here with the attitude to work their asses off. Like, you talk to any of those immigrant families, and that the adults that came in, and obviously they brought children with them in many cases, but the adults, they started businesses and they worked their asses off. They were tilers, they were concreters, they were builders, they were this, they were that, they ran shops, whatever it might have been. They worked their freaking asses off. And one generation later, you could see it in the houses they lived in. They'd actually, in one generation, exceeded the average wealth of the average Aussie, at the time, fourth generation Aussie, as my dad is, that actually exceeded his wealth because they just came in and they worked their asses off. And to me, that's always been one of the beautiful things about this country is in a sense, we are a meritocracy where people can work their asses off and actually make something out of their life, regardless. In my opinion, I mean, I'm a white guy, so my opinion doesn't matter. But that's kind of what I've seen, right? As I've grown up. Does that mirror what you've seen?
I think so. It mirrors what I've seen, and I can't recall a point in my life where my parents sat me down and said, "Hey, son, this is a racist country. Be careful," and all this kind of stuff. No, my parents just said to me, "Educate yourself, and you have these opportunities available to you." And they never kind of put that victim mentality into me. And this is in the 90s. And but what I've noticed now is in this generation, you have, I'm just going to use Sri Lankan kids as an example, but you have these like first or second generation Sri Lankan kids who are Australians, but they're born here, right? So let's, for instance, say my kids, whatever, if I had children, right? And they feel more of a victim in Australia today than what I should have felt in the 90s, if that makes sense. And do you understand what I'm saying? Like my parents came here with they couldn't speak English, all this stuff, and they managed to get through this country without feeling like victims. without feeling like their children are in danger or their children are victims. All of a sudden, we're in this time period in Australia where we have certain ideas being put into the heads of people just because of the way they look or whatever it is. And these are like Aussie kids, right? But they've been told that somehow they're not capable of doing things because they're victims of something. And I don't prescribe to that idea. And I think that's a dangerous way that this country is going as well, in some aspects, not in all aspects, but in some aspects of the way that we're moving forward as a country. We're starting to tell people that they can't achieve these things because there's people holding them. And I'm telling, what I'm saying is from my experience, I grew up in a time that it should have been worse. And I was able to rise above all those things because those impediments in mind exist at least. And I think a lot of it's artificial, it's made up, it's just a lot of some of it's Americanized nonsense as well, which we're trying to kind of recreate in Australia for things that don't exist here. And I mean, it's a broader topic that we could talk forever on, and some topic that I'm also interested in there.
So to bring it back to sort of the now and where we are with COVID-19 and the restrictions and everything, are you willing to hazard a guess at what the future holds? I don't know if you are or not, so feel free to say no, I'm not. But do you have an idea of how you think that this might play out from here?
If you asked me this, 10 months ago, I would have been like, yeah, I can kind of predict something. But the twists and turns we've taken, like even now, at the start of this, who would have thought you'd be saying stuff like, the Delta strain and all this kind of stuff, right? So the twists and turns this thing's taken, it makes it hard to predict. It makes it hard to kind of say where things are headed. All I know is that right now, we're kind of, it feels like we're out of it, but I don't think so. I think what's coming is the hardest part. Okay. And that's probably the way I see it. But like discussed before, there will be a out eventually, but it's just a long time coming.
Yeah, I said in October, and I still believe this is true. I think last month is going to be the peak of the lockdowns, but I don't think we've seen the peak of the vaccine mandates and the segregation from the vaccine mandates yet. I think that's still got a bit of a way to play out. One of the questions that has come up repeatedly throughout the conversation as I've been watching all the questions scroll through has been asking whether you have any aspirations when it comes to politics or anything like that. Do you have any thought in your mind that you might want to throw your hat in the ring in that area?
Not necessarily. I feel like the political game is something that you have to be willing to do, committed to doing. And I don't feel like my heart is in it in that way. There's lots of different ways that people can serve their community. And I think, if I was to look at myself in that aspect, I'm much better off doing what I'm doing and, taking on the ABC for taking on the media. I think that serves a much better purpose for what I'm doing, because politics is an interesting game, and it's not the same as whatever this is, right? It's a different game. I think you have to come to terms with being someone that potentially you're not, and it's not for everyone. And I think possibly some of the politicians we have now shouldn't even be in politics because they're in it for the wrong reasons, and you have to have a certain type of willingness to serve the community and do things in a certain manner to be in that space. And I don't think I meet that criteria.
Okay, fair enough. I want to jump back to Ricky's question. So sorry, boys, I just jumped on. Question for both of you. When was the most frightening or confronting moment when covering the protests and doing interviews, etc.? So Rukshan, have you had a moment that stands out to you in all of this as a confronting or a frightening sort of moment for you personally?
I think I kind of, if I was to pick a specific moment, I think I kind of tripped out when I saw them pull out the weapons near Flinders Street. when I saw the
Sorry,
police coming with those.
You just broke up a little bit. You just broke up a little bit for me. I don't know if it's my internet or yours. Can you say that again, please?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I was just saying
you,
that, when the police brought out the weapons at Flinders Street, those non-lethal weapons or whatever, I think that it kind of, I saw something with my eyes that was a bit different. And at the moment, I couldn't really process it because I was filming and doing all that stuff. But I did sense there was a change in that moment. And I think it's sad that in a way that people in leadership in this country haven't recognized the significance of such a moment. I know they're not non-lethal weapons or however they frame it, and crowd control weapons or whatever. The act of pulling out any type of weapon on an unarmed group of people, particularly a group of people who are dissatisfied with their government during a time like this, I think there's certain ramifications for us as a nation and as a people, and I think we haven't processed those kind of things yet. And obviously that ended with the police firing at people with tear gas canisters and weapons and stuff, like not only firing at them as they're fleeing, as they're running away. And to see those kind of scenes on, near Burke Street Mall and on Elizabeth Street, these tacticals firing at people as they're moving on and running away, I think those kind of scenes have really challenged me to, really think about what this means for our country going forward. And we haven't had that conversation in terms of leadership, because they've just kind of, that was necessary to do. And I don't think that necessarily is the right approach to dealing with it.
I think what we saw during those 3 days and what we've seen since the 3 days of the so-called tradie protests and what we've seen since, I think has really redefined for a lot of people what our government is willing to do. And there's many lines that we thought wouldn't be crossed that have now been crossed. And we know that they're willing to cross them again on the drop of a hat. For me personally, to answer Ricky's question, was actually the day that I think it was the 18th of September, the Saturday, I think it was the 18th, when we had the protest. And we worked so hard to avoid confrontation with police. The organizers organized us to get together on the corner of, was it Chapel Street and some other street, I don't recall. And we convened near that location. Obviously, there were police at that location, and we just continued to move away from the police every chance we got. We got kettled once, and everyone was able to get out, or not everyone, but most people were able to get out of that kettle, which was fantastic. And then we got kettled a second time, and I found myself quite close to the front. And those that follow my work, you'll know I'm not out there to be in the front line, right? That's not me. That's not my personality. It's not what I do. I don't have the balls for that, and I'm quite happy to admit that. But I found myself quite close to the front when all of a sudden people were pushing through the police line. And I ended up joining in that push. And that for me psychologically was a really significant moment. And it wasn't scary in the moment, but it was a significant moment for me psychologically to recognize that I was now literally not in violent confrontation, but I was in physical confrontation with the police. And I was joining this push through the police line to get out of that second kettle that they got on us on that particular Saturday. And then ultimately we got left alone for the rest of that day. But then it was the Monday immediately after that, 2 days later, was when all the tradie stuff kicked off, and we saw the level of violence from the police really, really, really escalate. I think for a lot of people, and we might finish on this, Rukshan, for a lot of people, this has been an awakening. I've talked before about the fact that prior to April 25th, 2020, I had never walked out my door intending to break the law, right? Now, I've been involved in political commentary for 12 years. I've been involved in a small number of protests in relation to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority in particular. That was the core of my work, was actually water management in Australia's food bowl. That was really the core of my work. But all of those protests were properly organized with the consent of the police and everything else. It all was above board. And on April 25th, 2020, I walked out my door to go to that protest in Trafalgar, the very first anti-lockdown protest in Victoria that I'm aware of, as a 38-year-old intending to break the law. And that was a real sort of watershed moment for me. And a lot of people have had that moment now. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing that people are getting more active than ever before under these circumstances? Does that say good things about our future, or should we be concerned about the fact that now there are thousands upon thousands of Victorians who have actually defied the government, defied the police, and showed up to protests and had confrontations with the police? Is this good or bad?
I think if we, in the term, obviously, forgetting all the craziness and all the interactions, that violence and all that kind of stuff, in the long term, I think for a country, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It is character building, the way that you move forward on something like this. You find a lot of nations throughout the world have had these experiences, this kind of civil unrest, and they've arisen from that in a different way. Again, going back to America, you have the Civil War, and then you have this kind of period of time where things kind of change and so forth. So you have this kind of building throughout history. And if I again go back to the subcontinent, you see this in India, for instance, or Sri Lanka, with the way that we moved away from the British Empire. And you have movements of protests through Gandhi and things like this. So you have this thing where people break rules and break laws, right? That God was doing, for example, was frowned upon by the British government because it was against the law. But they did those things anyway, and from that experience, you build something going forward. So I don't think it's necessarily always a negative. For me, I look at it as something built resolve and character, and made it even more important for me to kind of defend certain things about what I value about this country. Right, so I think many people can walk away from it in that way as well. They might think a lot of the time that these protests and there's no outcome, it's all in vain. There is always something there from being a part of these moments, and I think there is things that people can take away from this, definitely.
Yeah, look, on that last point that you made, people have said, "Oh, what have the protests achieved?" And I asked the reverse question. What if there had been no protest? What if no one had been willing to speak up and actually say, "Hey, this isn't right. We're going too far here"? What then would Daniel Andrews have been emboldened to do if there was no pushback whatsoever? So it's hard to know.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, you go.
I was going to say that there is always going to be pushback in society. You can't have a situation where the government says, look, it's a 1 in 100 year pandemic, all these kind of crazy draconian things. And then all of a sudden society just sits by idly against these things, right? If there was ever a time to protest, this is kind of like that scenario, right? Because people are in distress. They're losing their jobs. They're being attacked for, there's all these situations within the community and within our society that's leading for people to want to have their voices heard. So it makes more sense that during a time like this, that there would be, community upheaval about certain issues. So I think those people that don't understand why this is thing, and say like, oh, why are they doing this? I think they kind of can't see the world logically, because this is kind of the logical response to some of the things that are going on. Now, I'm not saying that, to tell people to go protest or to incite them or whatever it is. I'm just saying that that's the reality of these situations. A lot of the times people will go out and protest when confronted with these difficult situations. That's kind of a natural human response. And that's why we often say that protesting is a part of being a human and a human right.
Yeah, and I've said many times before, and I'm quite happy to be on the record, if there is a time to exercise your human rights, it's when the government says you don't have them, right? That's the number one time to get active, in my personal opinion, and defend your human rights. I'm going to jump to this comment by Andrew Fishman. Turnbull legislated no jab, no pay for childhood vaccines. Yes, and it was actually Scott Morrison who was the health minister at the time, if my memory serves me correctly, and he has used that as a kind of a justification for wanting, although he can't legislate them, and he acknowledges that he can't legislate them at a federal level, he wants vaccine mandates. He wants a segregated society between the vaccinated and the unvaxxed, and that was his background. So Turnbull legislated it as PM, but I believe it was ScoMo that was actually the health minister at the time. I may be wrong on that, but I believe that's the case. So, look, Rukshan, tonight's been fun. It has lived up to every hope that I had for it. I have nothing but massive respect for you, for what you've done, for the way that you just went, you know what, I can do something, and so I'm going to do my something. And it so happened that fate decided that your something was going to be the something that would go viral and huge numbers of people would watch. And I think you've made a huge difference already, let alone whatever you do in the future. I think you've made a huge difference already, and I'm very, very grateful to you. Do you have any final thoughts, final encouragements, anything that you want to leave our viewers with before we call it a night?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's watching this, I think we all have the ability within ourselves to be the, affect change in a way by just communicating with each other, by sharing our ideas, by sharing our thoughts, and just being engaged in these kind of debates. Don't for a second think that, you don't belong in this political space and that you can't engage with the idea and these debates. I think everyone's voice is valued. Don't let these politicians and these media people speak down to you. Don't let them, do some sort of power play over you where they try to put you in some sort of class of people that shouldn't be heard. That's not how our country works. And I feel like if that can be what I can give to people as encouragement, that's the way that people should go about it. That's the way I go about it. I could not care less what people in the media or politicians say about myself and what I'm doing, for instance. So I'm just doing my thing, and the kind of gauge that I gauge in terms of how I should be going about what I'm doing is through all of you, the people. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we should turn to each other. And we shouldn't need to turn to authority as such for validation or anything. And again, Topher, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for everything that you're doing as well. And, even having a platform such as this and engaging in discussion, I think is vital and important. So thank you. And, thank you for having me on here as well.
Hey. My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm a huge fan, Rukshan. I don't know how all of this sits with you. I know that for me, I wrestled with being Topher, and like I said before, I tried to kill off Topher multiple times over the last, sort of 12 years. And it's only been in the last 6 months that I've really actually started to go, you know what? If I'm going to claim to be a capitalist, which I am, then if people want what I create, then maybe I should take that as a signal that actually there's value in what I create. And I need to get over myself a little bit and just go, you know what? I am who I am. I believe what I believe. I stand for what I stand for. And I'm just going to get out there and do it and do more of it. And because clearly people want this, people are appreciating it. And I would encourage you in the same way. It's very, very evident just from the metrics, from the number of people that watch what you do, that want to hear what you've got to say. I think you bring a huge amount of value. And I want to encourage you to please just continue what you're doing. Keep on being Rukshan, sorry. The person that we've all gotten to know in just literally not even a year. We've all gotten to know you, and we've fallen in love with who you are and what you stand for. So thank you, and please keep doing that. I am very quickly just going to give one final plug to, excuse me, to Battleground Melbourne. Please, I will actually post the link in here. So it'll pop up in your chat shortly. It is givesendgo.com/Battleground Melbourne. I'm not going to give it a big plug, but please go there, have a read to see what that's about, and decide whether you would like to help make that possible and make that happen or not. That would be greatly appreciated. But Rukshan, thank you so much. You're an absolute legend. Who knows what happens from here? The problem with living in history is we can't flip to the end of the book and read and see how it finishes. None of us know. But I am so grateful that you are doing what you're doing, and please continue. And I'm so grateful for your time tonight. So everyone that's watched, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the comments, the great conversation that we've had. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. And please make sure you go and subscribe to Real Rukshan or The Real Rukshan on Facebook, on Instagram. Where else are you, Rukshan? What other platforms are you on?
Yeah, so you guys find me on Facebook, Instagram. I'm on Twitter, Telegram, and YouTube at the moment. So And all the handles are pretty much at the real Rukshan. And I think on Telegram, just real Rukshan. So yeah, come along and find me on those platforms.
All right. Make sure you do that. And I will talk to you during the week or next week for the next Slow Chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.